My name is Joseph Wunderlich. I'm a professor of engineering, architecture, and computer science, and this is the last of a 7-part lecture series on Frank Lloyd Wright. This covers the years 1946 until a little bit after 1958, because he dies a couple months into 1959. This is post-World War II, boom. Then the Cold War, even though Russia was an ally with us during World War II, the Soviet Union was formed, and the Berlin Wall went up, and then we entered the Cold War with the Soviet Union, against them, United States against Soviet Union, and then communal living at Taliesin. It's arguable how that developed. Perhaps Olga influenced that. And then the fellowship school continues at both Taliesin and Taliesin West, and then by Olga for another 27 years after Frank Lloyd Wright passes away. And it still exists today, except for some recent changes in 2020. And some notable designs. He still has quite a few designs during this time frame, but the ones I'm emphasizing here is Price Tower, a number of different churches and synagogues and auditoriums, the Guggenheim, some Arizona homes, and modern materials. First, we will review the first 6 parts. These are the majority of the references that I've used for these this lecture series, and they're worth taking a look at each of them individually when you have time. So beginning with his early childhood up until about age 19, he's influenced by his mother and father, early on with his mother through the Froebel blocks, and then mostly time in Wisconsin. The organic architectural design principles in detail here we've developed. We won't go through all of them now, but these are pretty well refined. So up to this age of 78 now, in 1945, right after the end of World War II, he was born right after the Civil War and into the Industrial Revolution. He's part of rebuilding Chicago after the 1871 fire. He's lived in Italy. He's lived through World War I when the U.S. was allied with Japan and Italy. Then he's lived in Japan for 3 years. Lives in California, marries Olga, a very important soulmate for his life. She lives with him 30 more years. He lives through the Great Depression for 10 years, then World War II for 5 years, this time against Japan, Italy, as well as Germany, and then lives through the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union over democracy and capitalism versus communism. So again, Olga, she's from Montenegro. Her mother was a general, father a Supreme Court justice who went blind, and she read for him. She went to school in Russia and married a Russian architect at age 20, then followed this philosopher, Gurdjieff, in Russia, who then opened an institute that she was part of in France, and mind, heart, and body kind of thing. With strict rules, and she came out with some skills. Then she would later convince Frank Lloyd Wright to create Taliesin Fellowship, the school, to make money during the Depression. And then after he passed away, she would run Taliesin for 28 more years. So for a total of 58 years, she was the main part of that. So now we're talking about his age 79 to 91 here. The fellowship's continued. He has students follow him to Madison, Wisconsin for 6 months, and then Taliesin, or then Scottsdale, Arizona, Taliesin West. So let's look at some of his designs, selected designs here. So this is 83 years old. It's First Christian Church in Phoenix. So my son in front of it. It wasn't built until 1973, after his death, but he designed it in 1950. Here's me in front of the church. Now, here's one who's 80 years old. This is the Unitarian Meeting House in Wisconsin, a triangular shape. Here's a slide from my lecture on form in my architecture theory class. You can follow links to that. See the simple geometric form still, stemming back to the Froebel blocks even now, in his old age. Triangular interior. Now this design is a prairie style, late in life, way past the peak of when he did most of them, but still people wanted prairie style. And it's a nice one that I visited. My wife and children, we all explored around it. It's a bed and breakfast now. So kind of a family vacation here. My wife grew up in this area, so we make a special trip. For me, was to visit Frank Lloyd Wright sites, but also so my wife could see her family homes. A couple more pictures. Wunderlich family architecture vacation, one of many. So now he's 85 years old. Now he always leaned towards maybe trying some high rises. He started out with Louis Sullivan, who was the father of the high rise, but in that office with Louis Sullivan, Frank Lloyd Wright was mostly in charge of residential, and that's what he's most known for. So this is not a common thing for him to do. This is an office building, and he did convince. This is one of the very first beginnings of a core of a building where all the utilities are going up the main core, and that's how he convinced the owner to build this, was the efficiency of that. Here's something in Los Angeles, age 85. Also at 85, this is one of his sons, David Wright's house. Went up for sale. It actually, there was a petition went around I signed 5, 6, 7 years ago to save this building from demolition and rebuilding on the site because the land's valuable. And then that worked, and it was going to be donated to the Frank Lloyd Wright School and Trust, which were one thing at one time. They're separating right now somewhat. But anyway, this is it's up for sale again now because the local people around the area didn't want the tourists coming if it was part of the Taliesin Fellowship. It's another design we visited. This is the Harold Price House in Phoenix, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. It was 87. We're in January here. Beautiful sunsets, beautiful weather. Not hot at all in January. So now, strong triangular shape. Now 87 years old, Philadelphia. This is a synagogue. At nighttime, here's a model. This is the interior. It's completely free of internal support, so it was quite a feat of engineering. Not so much on his part. He had to work with a structural engineer here, but the concept certainly was his. This is the Annunciation Greek Orthodox Church in Wisconsin, circular form. Age 89, circular form, interior circle. This is now the Marin County Civic Auditorium, Civic Center, age 90. Again, circular here. This is 91. This is a Gamid Auditorium in Phoenix, Arizona, on our Arizona State campus. Here's my son in front of that. Notice the brick pattern. It's very interesting. There it is in the background, you can see, and the landscaping around it. Now at 91, he's doing the Guggenheim, the model in New York City. There's a cutaway model, the interior. This is a view from the built interior. Now, he died just before it was finished. That's what it looks like from the outside. looking up to the skylight. Here's another one of his last designs in Phoenix, Arizona, in Scottsdale, also circular. The sun. So now that we're at the last lecture of a 7-part lecture series of Frank Lloyd Wright's life and works over his almost 92-year life and over 70-year career of designs, over 500 built designs, approximately 1,000 designs on paper. Let's look at the synthesis of his organic design principles from his several books and also other sources of my own experience through life. And this is my own interpretation of those principles. So, conforming to the site, firstly, this is a number of meanings. So the sun, following the sun's trajectories at different times of day and throughout the seasons, and bringing it into the house, and depending where you are, what latitude on the earth, you obey those sun angles. You use it for passive solar lighting and heating and cooling. Conforming to the topography. Don't build a house on top of the hill. It destroys the hill, he would say. Build it on the side, like Taliesin means shining brow, so it's like brow on the side of the hill, like on face. Certainly conforming to the environment, the natural vegetation. Don't just scrape the lot clean like some developers will do. But adhere to the environment, respect the environment. You learn that in a number of ways through his Unitarian belief system and his Japanese philosophies and influences there, and growing up in nature on the farm. Pinwheeled planes and the cruciform, that we found in some early designs. It was a precursor to what would then be the prairie school design style, the prairie school designs with broad central chimneys and long cantilevers and overhangs and balconies, part of those planes. The folded plane, so imagining like in origami, and there was actually paper folding, and the Froebel methods of his mother, but more formally in Japanese origami, continuity, wall, ceiling, and floors become one. Simple geometries from the Froebel blocks and the Froebel system that his mother used, and in educating him and homeschooling him, and you see that throughout his designs, throughout his life. The human scale, as opposed to a monumental scale, the human scale, designing to the scale of the human. And it's said that his buildings seemed to have a little lower ceiling height because he was short, and that is actually true. Open floor plan, he's a pioneer of that. He picked up on that first when he saw the Japanese exposition in the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, and then when he visited Japan twice and then lived there for 3 years. That's certainly a principle in Japanese design that you'll see. And so he's implementing that in a time where Victorian is very common, and the Victorian is a compartmentalized box-type rooms, and so he's destroying the box and then creating a flow between rooms, inside and outside. And now walls become screens, band of windows, framing views like the Engawa, which is essentially a covered porch, but it's an integral part of the Japanese design, bringing inside out and outside in flow between the spaces. Form and function R1, a harmony, not one following the other secondarily, but a harmony, a joining. And this stems back to Chinese philosophy, which is also at the root of Buddhism in China and then in Japan. And then also Shintoism in Japan, originally from Taoism mixing with indigenous, Taoism from China mixing with indigenous tribal religions of early Japan. So this stems way back, this yin and yang idea. And that's what he meant, and that's what he corrected people when they'd say, oh, you mean form follows after function. No. I mean, Louis Sullivan actually coined the phrase more, and he meant that a little more literally. And there was actually more ancient root to the original saying. But Frank Lloyd Wright corrected everybody and said this is a complementary kind of form and function together. When he means form following function, like in a circle. So a unified whole is an extension of that. Inside and out, orchestrating the sun. Bring the nature out of materials. So look for the nature within the materials and bring it out. But innovate also. So not just natural materials in natural state, but also some new ideas. He invented the textile blocks, with the Mayan patterns for reasons of his own personal journey. But nevertheless, modular textile blocks cast out of concrete, then woven with reinforcing steel. Not so much reinforced concrete like you would know it nowadays. He made these textile blocks and then kind of threaded the reinforcing steel through it. Also, the modular Ken design seems to have influenced him. That's a modular over fixed units of the tatami, the fixed unit dimensions of the tatami mat. Tatami means mat in Japanese. Structural art, like in nature. The veins and the leaves, that structure is defining the space. The interior space made it exterior as architecture. That's why we do barn frame, post and beam, mortise and tenon kind of architectural projects leading up to the shell that's defined by that interior. We do that as an exercise in several of my architecture courses. At this point I'm recording this, I've taught 7 different architecture courses, actually 9 depending on how you count it. If you can count the independent research, the variation of the one course. But so anyway, structural art, yes, we just mentioned that. Now also soft, warm, optimistic color tones. Oh, before we go on, structural art, he first mentions that, or he certainly emphasizes it in his book on woodblock prints that he publishes. And he's speaking of how there's always structure in the art itself. And that's important if you think about how his art works and looks. So next, soft, warm, optimistic color tones of earth and autumn leaves. Assimilating fixtures into the structure. So the indirect lighting and recessed lighting and the ceilings and the floors and the way he uses light and illumination is a key thing in assimilating the fixtures. Also the built-in furniture. He very often specifies the furnishings, and the cabinet work certainly, but more than that, actual furniture also. And even beyond that with the dishware and curtains sometimes, and even an evening gown. Many plants and planters. Architecture equals music. Now this stems back to his father, who was a professional musician. Now he was a preacher, and also a lawyer, and a school superintendent. He's highly educated, bachelor's and master's from Colgate University. For the time, that's extremely highly educated. But he was mostly known for his being a musician. He was also a lover of the arts too, including Asian type things. So certainly had an influence on Frank Lloyd Wright, and you see that both symbolically through the organizing of architecture like a symphony, and other analogies to music, as well as literally. So he would specify special spaces for pianos to go, and even specify organs in some of the buildings. Churches, of course, but also like an office building. Architect mentor Louis Sullivan. Now, he had several mentors, and Louis Sullivan was definitely the most influential. And he's also part of the organic design beginnings, because both Frank Lloyd Wright and Louis Sullivan disliked the neoclassical Roman and Greek, especially in the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, but also the Victorian. They want to do something a little different. So they were both rebels and pioneers in architecture, and Louis Sullivan actually had some literally organic type of detailing to some of his walls and balconies, and so you see that, not so much in the form of things, but again, they're an influence. Now, the arts and crafts movement was an influence, and that in England, and then in the United States, as a movement to simpler handmade crafts, somewhat of a reaction to the industrialization and the machine. Now, Frank Lloyd Wright also lived in Italy first after he went off with the wife of one of his clients to Italy for a year, and also visited Germany and Paris and Austria. He published a book with a German publisher, but then lived in Fiesole, Italy, right outside of Florence, and I've been right to where he was there. It's a beautiful place, and he was there for more than a year. And if you've been to Italy at all, you can see how that would influence you for a lifetime, even with one visit. I've been there 6 times and lived for a month teaching a course, and I feel it. And now he's lived there for more than a year, so you don't hear it mentioned much. But I believe Italy, you could see influences in the lectures. You go back and look, you'll see my mention of it, the influence of Italy. Now, Japan, everybody's all over this now. Now, I certainly have pointed out a number of places here throughout the lecture series, and so it's pretty obvious now. And so I even have pictures that I took in Japan before the archives released his actual pictures, which are now at Columbia University. And then when they posted those, I put them side by side, and many of the same pictures I could see. Everybody could see how he was influenced. Then you see a slide here of a Japanese garden in Narita that I visited. We were there for 3 weeks. I was a keynote speaker in Osaka, an architectural talk I gave for an hour. And then we lived in Kyoto for about 2 weeks. Also was in Narita for several days. And so this picture of a huge Japanese garden with some key words from my colleague of Japanese culture and language, Mahawa Bhattacharya, and just about inner and outer, insider, outsider, and shame and group harmony. That's a key thing. Wa, I teach that in a number of my courses. And so that you see that in the spirit of the architecture, those key words, the culture of Japan in the the vernacular of the architecture. Then lastly, in the corner here, you see a Japanese Shinto shrine gate, which represents the entry from the human world into the spirit world. This is a huge gate. You can see at the bottom there, that little block is actually a truck tractor trailer. So it'll give you the idea of the size of this shrine. Now, extracting one thing out of that that's a little more relevant than most to what we just looked at, although it's all very relevant, was the simple geometric shapes, very much emphasized, the circular shapes and the triangular shapes. And so he makes it almost to 92 years old. It's a long, extremely productive life. Olga will continue the fellowship for another 27 years after he dies. And a couple of personal examples here. My wife's grandfather on her father's side was a professional engineer. They designed and built this house, and her father and him built this with the Roman brick, which is very much a Frank Lloyd Wright kind of thing, and this is in the Chicago area. Then my wife's other grandfather is also a professional engineer, bought this house, and there are several Frank Lloyd Wright houses right around this in Batavia and Geneva, and you can see some of the influence from those on this design. One last slide, and I want you to definitely follow this. Go find the PDF or the PPTX with audio. If you're watching this on YouTube, there'll be links to those in the comments. But do listen to this. This is 9 minutes long, and some important words of Frank Lloyd Wright. And I'll close here with reading a quote from Frank Lloyd Wright. He says, "Science will eventually join with art and religion, and when they are one, then we will begin to have the right kind of education. We will have the right kind of buildings, and we will have a greatly improved method of life."